Contrast is a collaborative work, a podcast fully produced and hosted by the officers and residents of the Idaho Correctional Institution in Orofino.
Welcome back to Contrast. In this episode, we're going to discuss addiction and substance abuse. We do have a guest speaker with us today, Wendy.
I'm Wendy Gebhardt. I'm the program manager at ICIO.
I'm Larry.
Terry McCurlin. I'm the warden.
And I'm Dave. I'm just here for the ride.
All right, Dave. Terry McCarlin is more than just the warden. She actually runs the show on this podcast, just in case anybody didn't know that. So back to Wendy.
Don't you forget that when I start taking this over.
Back to our guest speaker. We appreciate you being with us today. Maybe tell us a little bit about your history and kind of your background and as it reflects substance abuse and addiction recovery and those kinds of things.
Sure. So I went back to school in 2003, completed a psychology degree with a chemical dependency minor. And then I came to work at the department as contract staff as a DARS, Drug and Alcohol Rehabilitation Specialist. And I realized really quickly that a bachelor's degree with a chemical dependency minor does not really prepare you for all of the issues that come up in groups, because they don't do anything to train you for the significant things that seem to be drivers of substance use. So I decided to go back to school and got my master's degree in community mental health counseling. And I've continued to work through the department, first as the contract staff, and then I was hired on in, I think, 2008 as a case manager, and then promoted to clinician, and then promoted to program manager. So I've worked with substance use in one way or another through that whole time.
Thank you.
This episode I've been waiting for a long time to do because addiction is something that's affected my life since I was really young. And as I've been in the system, I've noticed that most people that are in here, whether it's directly or indirectly, are here for our substance abuse issues. And I feel like if that's just one of those key problems that if we could just solve that piece of it, the ripple effects could just be amazing in the system. And just a little bit about my history and myself is I have a sister who's 1 year younger than me, and we grew up together and we were really close. And we both suffered the same kind of trauma in our lives as children, only different situations. And when we were early teens, we both started using at the same time, and that lasted for the next 10 years. And side by side, we were running the streets together. Everywhere I went, she went. We were, inseparable, and our addiction grew at the same pace. And one day, I couldn't find my sister, and I'm like, where's she at? And I started going around to all the places I always went to, looking for her, couldn't find her, nobody knew where she was. I got really worried, and come to find out, she had checked herself into a treatment center. And she got clean and sober, and I stayed on the streets. And here I am. I've been in prison now for 20 years. My addiction got so bad that I could not pull myself out of it, and it put me right here where I'm at. And her life went the other way. She got out of treatment, got her kids back, went to college, and became a drug and alcohol counselor, which she's been for 20 years now. She's got a beautiful home, a beautiful family, cars in the driveway, and here I sit. And there's not a day goes by that I don't think about that.
How your life could have been different if you had just been able to make that choice in the beginning.
If I would have been able to make that choice, yeah. And I talked to her about it a lot, and she's really amazing. She's able to put things into perspective, And I've recently, in the last few years, I've came to terms with how much trauma affects our lives, especially childhood trauma. And I've suffered some some trauma in my childhood that, like, is kind of like a domino effect. And I was reading a book by Richard Brand, and he said that trauma is a gateway drug, and that stuck with me. And I feel like I feel like it's all part of the same problem. It's all sort of the same thing.
It really is.
And Dave could not have transitioned to that any better. And he doesn't even know what we're going to talk about today. And I'm not sure Kent knows what we're going to talk about today. So this is when I get to take over.
Get to you have my permission. Go ahead.
I know, right? So Dave's talking about childhood trauma, and it's not just childhood trauma, but that's typically where it begins, right? Because that's where life begins. This is a child. What's really cool, and I'm going to let her go into it a little bit more, but I was talking to Wendy about what she was going to present on today, and it's about ACEs. And I don't know how many of you have heard of ACEs, but that's what she wants to talk about today. So talk about an amazing transition, Dave, and you didn't even know what we were going to discuss as far as the majority of the conversation. So awesome on you, which means to me that this podcast was meant to be, because we didn't even know what we were going to discuss, but it's on everybody's heart in the exact same way. So with that, I'm going to just turn this right on over to Wendy Gephardt.
Well, and it's funny because I said, can I talk about ACEs? And Terima said, absolutely, because you really can't talk about substance abuse without talking about ACEs. And, we're in this big pandemic, and the reality of it is that we have had a significant pandemic in America for a long time, and we aren't even aware of it. And it's identified by the ACEs, which are the adverse childhood experiences. And back in the 90s, I think it was, Kaiser Permanente did a series of surveys. They were anonymous, but they surveyed over 17,000 people asking about these adverse childhood experiences like abuse and neglect, and then household dysfunctions, and how they're tied with illness, with physical illness and with emotional illness, substance use. And so if you don't mind, I'm going to just tell you what the 10 that they studied were: physical abuse, emotional abuse, sexual abuse, physical and emotional neglect. If you have a parent with mental illness, if you have a parent who has substance dependence, if you have a parent who's incarcerated, parents are separated or divorced, or if you witness domestic violence in the household. And those are the 10 that were the initial study of 17,000. But since then, people have reproduced this study over and over and come up with the same results. And they've added some different ones, like homelessness. How does that affect? But significant correlation between trauma and substance use. And the thing is that substance use is not just like a chosen choice of, I think I'm just going to go get high and that's wonderful. When you have those traumas, and this, if it's dorky to hear brain stuff, but I love how our brains operate. When you have experienced traumas, then your body is ready for fight or flight at all times. And so you're releasing all of this cortisol in your system. And our body was only created for fight or flight for certain instances. Something's chasing us or attacking us, and so then we need to run. But when you have those traumas, you're prepared for trauma at any moment. So cortisol, is coursing through your system, and it impacts the brain. Cortisol impacts our musculature. It impacts our joints. It breaks the joints down. That's why when you get cortisone shots, you can only have a few because it'll start to break down the joint. But that trauma causes issues in the amygdala. That's our fight or flight part of our brain. it causes prefrontal cortex damage, which that's what inhibits us from doing things impulsively. That's why a lot of times when old people have strokes, they, like the old grandma that never cussed a word a day in her life, and she's like cussing left and right. And you're like, what the heck's going on with grandma? Or, the super pious the old guy who's then like pinching people's behinds because they've lost that the prefrontal cortex control. And so with substance, then there becomes more impulsivity. And it causes some other significant issues in the brain, but that's that base from that trauma that then leads to the use of substance. And when it comes to substance use, if you have, everybody has, most people score at least a 1 on the ACEs evaluation, like 67% of America does. But the percentage of people that have 4 or more ACEs is about 12%. So 1 in 8 people have an ACE score of 4 or greater. And some statistics specific about a 4+ on ACEs, you are 4 times more likely to experience depression. You're 12 times more likely to have suicidality. When it comes to substance use, a 7 times increase in alcoholism, and a 2 to 4 times higher risk of substance abuse, and much earlier, 2 to 4 times early substance use. Because, people are trying to find a way to numb pain or to feel good.
Escape reality.
Right.
Absolutely. And it gets even more alarming when it's a 5+ on the ACEs, because a person with a 5+ on the ACE scale is 7 to 10 times more likely to use illegal drugs, 7 to 10 times more likely to become addicted to illegal drugs, 7 to 10 times more likely to use injectable drugs, and they're 3 times higher risk for misusing pain medications that are prescribed pain meds. Also, there's a big increase in adult late onset substance use, so alcoholism after the age of 50. And so there's just this huge tie between trauma and substance use. And so when you're talking about having trauma history, it's not that there's something wrong with you. It's about what have you experienced and how has that impacted you, and how have you chosen to cope with it, or what ways work for you to cope.
I have a very similar, like that, hearing all that and hearing what Dave said, I have a very similar experience in the childhood trauma. My brother, my sister, and I, we all grew up basically going through the same onslaught of things. We all started smoking real early. Actually, they got me started, and he's 2 years younger than me, and she's 2 years younger than him, and they got me started smoking cigarettes. And we all ended up strung out on meth. We all ended up injecting. We all ended up doing all the things we swore we'd never do because Mom abandoned us for those drugs. She left us and just left us in a hotel somewhere. And some people found us and brought us and gave us to my grandparents in Idaho from California. And I swore I'd never be like her, and I turned out just like her. And the crazy part was that every time my life was going down the tube, I thought all I had to do was stop drinking and drugs. That was the problem. Drinking and drugs was the problem, right? So I always failed. And it was crazy because my little brother, he got in trouble one time, went on a rider, came back, he slept with a girl, got in trouble, had to go back, and he was done. He's like, you know what? Never again. I'm never taking that bus ride again. And he became a peer support specialist and has been making like $20 an hour helping people like us change their lives for the last 10 years. And I'm like, man, that's crazy. And one of my biggest takeaways from this has been that it wasn't the drugs and alcohol that was the problem. It was my broken way of seeing the world. It was my broken way of expressing and feeling love. It was all the things that I could not say to people, all the fear that I had inside me, the tough guy image that I had to put on because if I didn't, the world was going to get me. And I found that strength or that protection, that safe feeling on the streets by just putting on a big show, basically. I acted out really super crazy to where I got arrested, but not crazy enough to where somebody got hurt. And because I didn't really want to hurt somebody, I just wanted everybody to be like, that guy, he will hurt you. And all these years later, because I did that enough times and got in trouble enough times, even though nobody got hurt, when this happened, they looked at me and said, you know what, you're out of control. And it had worked so well to cocoon me in this tough guy image that's who they thought I was. And I was like, wow, why did they think that about me? But really, that's what I created. That's what I wanted, and that's what I got. And so it was crazy to talk with my brother because we were on the phone, and he goes, you know, I can't think of a reason why I would use meth again. He said, I just can't think of a reason. He says, but I love that stuff. He's all, just so you know, he's like, I love it. He's like, I love everything about it. I just can't find one way or one reason in life to be stable and do that stuff. He's all, because it made me feel good and it made me feel safe and it made me think. So when I think about it, I think of love. I think it's good. He's all, but I ended up alone and hollow and empty every single time. Every time I used it, I was alone. He's all, now I got a family. I got dogs. I got a house. I got cars. I've got my daughter. And he says her mom's doing the same things that we used to do, and she's alone and she's empty. And it really clicked. It resonated with me just thinking about that because you have that struggle. It's like you tell yourself, I'm going to hate this stuff now. I'm going to hate it. I'm going to hate it. And I'm going to change. But really, it comes down to all the other changes you make that just they lead you away from it. You know, I don't know.
Pretty amazing, isn't it?
Yeah, it's crazy.
And what is amazing to me is that you can grow up in the same household and experience things the same. I mean, like with other people, but your takeaway from the experience is so different. And so the level of trauma may come out different for each person because everyone has their own level of resiliency. And some people are just innately resilient and they can go through every trauma that could be imagined, and they never resort to maladaptive coping, like substance use. And then someone else may not even have, and I don't want to like minimize trauma, but something as significant, but because they have that limited resiliency, it's so much more impactful to them. So like when you're talking about your sister, you know, you were on a similar path, but it may be that she found some resiliency in that time, or, you know, even when we're a kid and we're having trauma issues, if you've got one strong person in your life, that can be significant enough to dissuade you from making negative choices. You know, it's pretty amazing how we can turn out so different, even in different situations.
When we did training for the Royal Family Kids Camp that we did for the children that were considered high risk, many of them were either in the some sort of care with Child Protective Services or Health and Welfare. Either they had been in foster care or they had been adopted. We talked to the people that are working at that camp, and we actually introduced ACEs to them to help explain why the kids are struggling the way that they are. And a lot of people that go through that training are shocked at the number of ACEs that they have as well. But then we talk about the resiliency piece, and very specifically in that information that we shared with people during that training is that kids that get involved in the foster care system, 80% of them will become incarcerated if there is not one form of an intervention. And so we talk about that resiliency piece. And Ms. Gephardt said something specifically about that one person that could be in your life that would be that intervention piece. Who's to say what that intervention was for your sister? I mean, maybe
Right.
she knows now,
Yeah.
but there was probably someone or something that happened for
Yeah.
her that made her decide that she was going to take this huge step, because
Yeah.
I would assume in that process, she was probably afraid of hurting you by stepping away from that life. And so there was a lot she had to think about before she went
Yeah.
into that care.
Yeah, there was a lot going on there too because, like I said, we were side by side, and so I'm sure if she was going to make that step, it had to be without me because I would have held her back,
Right.
and that was probably rough for her too. I could imagine.
Yeah. And so when Wendy was talking about doing ACEs, ACEs is also something that our current leadership in central office has really been looking at. The Deputy Director, Bree Derrick, brought that up a couple of months ago when we were discussing, actually it's been over a year ago, wow, when we were discussing the direction of our facilities and our probation and parole, and trying to be proactive rather than reactive in our correctional setting, and trying to be more trauma
Some trauma-informed care.
trauma-informed care. Yeah, that's what I was trying to think of. And she specifically brought up ACEs. And so I think it's very interesting that that's been something we've had an opportunity today to kind of talk a little bit about. And also that conversation piece about the intervention, one person being that intervention. And if nothing else, I hope that somebody takes away from this podcast that you can be that intervention as well.
I love ACEs. I just came to terms with my trauma from my childhood not too long ago, and I had hid it and didn't tell anybody. It was my big secret for 40 years. The first person I told is standing right here in this room, and he's one of my best friends. And that was the first time I ever spoke it out loud. And since then, I've been able to write about it. And it's as soon as I came to terms with that, all the pieces started coming together. All of a sudden, my life made sense. I thought all my life that I was just a bad person. And I thought there was something wrong with me. I thought I didn't think the same way as everybody else. I didn't feel the same way. I didn't care the same way. And something was broken inside of me. And I never went any deeper with it. And one night I watch a lot of PBS, and I was watching a show, and it was about ACEs. And that week I had spoken to my son on the phone, who was in prison in Cottonwood. And he was my baby boy, my youngest, he was my baby. And it was such a hard phone call. And I hung up the phone, and I was processing all this, and the show came on about ACEs. And all of a sudden, things started making sense. And for the first time in my life, I understood. And it was talking about how it's generational, and they're able to through ACEs, they're able to see people's pathways, and they could use it as a tool to prevent children from going to prison. And it blew me away. And I wrote about it. I'm not trying to self-promote, but I got a book coming out, and one of the essays in there is about ACEs and about this exactly. It's called Lines, and it was amazing. And it kind of showed me also that we're just kind of cobbled together piece by piece as we go along, and we don't wake up one day who we are, we are pieces of our pasts. And I think it's important, if we're going to deal with stuff like addiction, we have to deal with that part of it. We can't leave that part of it out.
I know when you talk about that feeling like you were the only one that's like that. So I don't experience excitement like I perceive other people do. I've heard people like say, "Oh, I was so excited I couldn't sleep last night." I'm like, you're weird. Like there's nothing in my life. I fell asleep while my kid was being born. Like I don't get excited about nothing, anything. And then sometimes I feel robbed by that because like I'll say, I'm excited about this, but I don't have that passion like some people do. And I feel robbed sometimes because I see that drives people forward in life. They're excited about a career. They're excited about their family. They're excited about anything. And I'm not excited about anything. I have to create my own hype inside and just drive forward knowing that that's what I need to achieve. And I found a lot of that here in the dog program. I didn't ever have that in my life. I'd make it short periods. I'd make it like 5 to 6 months, maybe a year. But I'd always fall apart because I was just trying to get whatever I thought everybody wanted to see me achieve. The job, the house, a wife, kids. Like that's the American dream. That's what you're supposed to have. There it is, Dad, I did it. You know what I mean? Or Mom or whatever. And all my life I've struggled because I didn't have the mental fortitude just to keep doing the next right thing, you know. And I felt like I was the only person that ever felt like that. It was crazy. I have a pen pal I've been talking to, and he has a son that's struggling, and I guess his son has some mental health disorders, and he writes things like that he's abused and all these, and he goes, but it's not real. He's like, do you think that yours was real or perceived? He's like, I'm not trying to minimize it, but it made me think. And I really started thinking about it, and I was like, I wonder how often in my childhood did I perceive, or even growing up, perceive that I was unloved, feel unloved, and so therefore I reacted and acted in the way that I did and created the reality that was the hardship, the punishments, you know, that made it more like a reality to me. I related it to like the Matrix. Sometimes I think about that a lot. I can't help it. So he walks in, because Neo walks in to talk to the Oracle, and she's like, hey, Neo. She says, you know, don't worry about the vase. He goes, what vase? And he turns, knocks it off, and breaks it. He goes, how did you know? She goes, a better question is, if I hadn't said it, would you have done it? And so it made me think, like, if I hadn't acted as if I was unloved, would I have felt more loved? Would it have been easier to love me? I don't know. It's just these deep questions that sometimes you get into when you stop looking at the addiction and the alcohol as the problem and start looking at what rooted you in the alcohol and the addiction, you know?
But I heard two things that I'd like to dispute.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. By far.
Or reframe. So one of the things, you know, that feeling that you're not getting excited like everyone else,
No.
especially with meth use and stimulants, it really does cause some brain damage in that area of the brain where we get our rewards. And so because you get such a euphoria from meth use, you can't ever recreate that. And so what would be considered a normal, you know, excitement for someone else is never going to compare to what you know as the excitement of that high.
Right.
And so your gauge is broken. Yeah, your gauge gets broken. And so it's not that, you know, you can blame it on the brain damage. That's what I'm going to say.
Yes. So I do have an excuse.
But I would love for you to reframe that about the feeling unloved. If you felt unloved, you felt unloved. But it sure sounds like a lot of self-blaming that if I would have felt more loved, maybe I would have been more loved. So that sounds like you're taking on that responsibility yourself of being unloved, which caused you to have some mental fortitude issues.
Right. Okay.
And I would just like you to not think like that. I mean,
Absolutely.
not that it's easy to say,
Absolutely,
but
yeah.
I would love for you to reframe that and look at that. You know, that was your experience of feeling unloved.
right.
And how did your experience lead you to make the choices that you did? It's not a fault issue or a mental fortitude issue.
Yeah.
It's about that this was your experience and this is how you chose to cope with that experience.
Absolutely.
And it's not, I don't want to say it's bad or it's good or anything. It is what it is.
Right.
And so how can you move forward and, you know, gain that love and acceptance from people in a positive, healthy way for you?
Absolutely. I like that. I know in the context he and I were talking, was more like a father to son relationship. He was wondering, hey, how do you think my son's feeling? Like, why do you think he's saying this? So I was kind of going from that angle. But I did realize that I spent most of my life, like I said, are you happy now, Dad? Right? Is it good now, Dad? Did I do the right thing now, Dad? I was always trying to get my father's acceptance because he was a hard worker. He was a high school dropout, but now he makes good money. He's very successful, and I just felt like I never could reach the bar. And if I came close, then he just put it up a little higher, and I felt like it was always not enough. And now we don't talk. Because I was always trying to apologize, always trying to make up for whatever it was I was lacking or whatever I did to create the turmoil in our family. And so I was always blaming myself for this thing. Mom didn't like me, or it was because of my stepbrother. It was all these things that I just heaped on myself all my life. And that's something else that's happened. I mean, we haven't talked since I lived on A Block. And so that was the first week I got here. So it's been over 3.5 years since I've spoke to my father. And I think about him. I love him. Someday I hope he sees that I'm doing good. But I'm no longer going to seek for the approval of what I can go forward and do. I can be successful. I can be good. I can be loved. I can love other people. And I don't need him to tell me that it's so. And that was a big step for me because all my life I needed that. I was seeking for somebody. I was codependent with women. I was always looking for someone to tell me, you're doing good enough. And now I can be like, you know what? I'm doing good enough. I'm going forward. I'm sober. Helping other people. Being productive. Being constructive. And so...
I'd like to hear more about the generational thing that you kind of brought up and how that affects things through generations.
Oh, so I wrote about this too. So I'm a volunteer librarian. It's not a paid position, but I sit down there and it's the greatest thing in my life because I sit in a library that's full of books, which I love, in a little office that's even more filled with different books. And one day I pulled this book down, and it was talking about trauma, and it was talking about something called transgenerational trauma. And it was talking about these studies they do to where they proved through using mice that it's actually there's a gene there's proteins that are present when someone experiences trauma that can be passed through generations, so that your children will actually experience through genetics the trauma that you've experienced. Well, it will be
Wow.
It's passed from generation to generation, and so they'll have some of the symptoms, the anxiety and the trouble dealing with things, the same as if it was them that experienced it.
Crazy.
And it blew my mind, and it was kind of sad, but it was kind of amazing at the same time to realize just how much it affects your life. Right down to the genetic level, it affects you.
Makes me think of a book that I read that says to the third and fourth generation. And I'm like, wow, that never really clicked. I'd never heard that quite like that. That's really cool.
And if we're looking from like a psychological perspective, we learn from our parents. And so when we look at, just learning theory in general, we observe the people that are around us and how they deal with their surroundings, and then we recreate that. And so if someone has a trauma history and they're always hypervigilant about certain things, well, then they're teaching their children to be hypervigilant about those same things. And if their coping responses are what we would consider maladaptive, I like a way that this one doctor said, he called it compulsive comfort seeking instead of maladaptive, because that seemed to, make it seem more palatable for some people to look at in that respect. But if that's the coping responses that you see growing up, then those are the coping responses that you know. And so you're going to recreate the ones that you know, which then adds to that generational trauma. If you use substances and then your children then end up using substances, well, what are the things that come along with substance use? You know, a lot of times it's neglect or abuse, or people leave their children with people that maybe are, you know, considered unsavory because they're too busy getting high, you know. So it just passes from generation to generation.
That's interesting because I can see even with myself when I was a new parent, I would always think about, well, how did my parents do that with me for this situation, or how did they expect this to happen, or punishments and things of that nature. And because that's what you knew, that's what you saw, so you started working that. But I think that's kind of funny because with kids that are my younger kids, I parented them differently because I saw mistakes that had happened in my parenting, those kinds of things. And so I was able to change that. But it's just interesting because it is what you see. That's what you know.
It's almost like we need to wait until we're 40 plus before we have children. Not that our bodies would like that at this point, especially when it comes to sleep. But the truth is the average, I think most people start families, I would say average is between 20 and 30. We'll kind of give it a big range there. Some are obviously earlier. I don't know what the average age is in this current time in the United States, but the truth is we don't have kids when we are wise.
Experienced adults, yeah.
Exactly. And so the truth is I myself look back on, especially my oldest son, and I can see him responding the same way I did when he was 4, as far as having an anger issue, probably definitely a lot more quick to respond, and not always appropriately when he would do things that I didn't like. And his lack of patience looks just like mine did when I was 30 and raising him as a young man. Well, he was a boy at that time. And so I definitely am parenting Aiden differently, but he's also a very different child. And so, we don't start raising kids when we are smart, when we are more wise like we are today, and we can look back at those things. And I think that's a huge part of the generational thing that we talk about. I know that as grandparents, my mom is a completely different person than she was as a parent. She had lots of trauma as a child, and I know that a lot of that trauma is what resulted in how she raised me, which made me the person that I am, which is definitely not perfect. Yes, I said that, Kent Shriver.
That's
Holy
new.
cow.
I know,
That
right?
is new. Wow. I can't even believe it.
She's
I'm
going to have
close.
him cut it out.
I'm close, but not quite.
That's going to end up on a loop.
I'm not perfect. I'm not perfect. I'm not perfect. Right. But it makes me, I look at that and I think, I get it. I get that generational thing. And if we could only just wait until we were much older to start having kids.
It's funny hearing you guys talk about it, because at some point I realized that the difference I saw in how they treated my little brother was just that. Was seeing that nothing that they were trying to do, all the beltings, all the punishments that just stuck in my room alone for hours and hours, it didn't work. It didn't get me nowhere. It didn't, you know what I mean? All they did was prepare me for prison. I mean, I'm sitting in the room alone all the time. I'm used to sitting alone. You know what I mean? So it was them changing. But to me, at that young age, and as I was growing up, watching them treat him totally different was like, it fortified the thought that I was unloved. I was like, they love him. You know what I mean? And so it's crazy, because I had to realize that at some point and stop blaming my brother for all my mistakes too. Because, slowly but surely everybody got vindicated of all my mistakes. I had to finally take some responsibility.
My oldest makes comments once in a while about how my youngest gets away with everything, but really it's just a different form of holding him accountable than I did with my oldest. Not that it's great. because he's a
She's like, eventually.
challenging young man at 15.
She says,
but-
eventually he will feel guilty. Don't worry.
right. All right.
So, within the system, within the Department of Corrections, not just Idaho, but in general, how is this being addressed? Because we can all recognize that it's a huge part of the problem. So, what exactly is being done to address this, and how has it changed? I mean, it seems to me like recently there's been a bit of a change. It seems like it's being recognized more, and there's been more effort put into solving this problem. Maybe before, like I said, I've been in the system for 20 years. It didn't even seem like it was a problem. It wasn't even recognized really as a problem. But today it seems like there's more of an effort to solve that. It's like a front door, back door thing, you know?
Right.
It feels like the Department of Corrections is moving more towards a front door problem solving instead of a back door. And I wonder if how you see that.
Well, I think that we have a long way to go when it comes to addressing trauma and increasing our trauma-informed care. But one thing I do think we do well is that we try to instill resiliency in the men that we work with. And you may not see that as like resiliency planning, but it really is, because when we look at resiliency, it's that that ability to really have some optimism, which, like when I talk about, I'm going to bring Sabisa specifically, and
Right.
we don't necessarily talk about optimism in there, but we definitely talk about who's your peer support. So who cares about you and who is going to hold you accountable when you're going sideways, and who's going to love you when you're the least lovable. You know, when you're setting up that plan of who in success, who are you going to rely on? We work on that part.
So what is Sabisa for people who don't know, and what?
So it's a cognitive behavioral intervention for substance abuse, because we know that if we just think about things, we don't make change. And if we just do a behavior but we don't have a thought process change, we don't have long-term change. But if we have a cognitive change and a behavioral change, then we're more likely to be successful because they integrate together. So the goal is to have both pieces included. And so we work on things like cognitive flexibility, which really is part of resiliency as well. If you can think about things different than you did previously, then you're going to try different solutions to the problems. I don't think we do a really good job necessarily of addressing physical well-being in Sabisa because we don't talk a whole lot about physical health, but we do spend time like building a personal moral compass.
So who all gets this programming, and how does that work?
Well, statistically, I can't give you the exact number of people that have to take substance abuse treatment, but the number is high. Anyone that has a substance abuse history that scores needing it. And, you know, we use a GAIN assessment when people are coming in, and if they don't have a GAIN, then we look at the substance abuse piece on the LSI, because we're trying to use some really good assessments so that we're making good choices and putting people in the programming that they actually need, and getting that focus where it needs to be, and especially focusing on higher risk behaviors, because what we see is people incarcerated have higher substance abuse scores, higher LSI scores than those that are out on probation and parole, and those that have higher risks when they get out are more likely to recidivate. And honestly, I think part of that is that we need to do more to work on addressing that primary trauma so that people are better prepared when they go out and they have better coping responses. when they get to community. But we spent in 2020 over $13 million in Idaho for substance abuse related treatments, and then another 2.8 or 3, right around 3 million that was SUD specific. So a lot of people are reaching out for substance treatment, and a lot of the community providers are really focusing on trauma-informed care, so that they can spend more time addressing the trauma itself, not the addiction. Because when we're talking about the addiction instead of the trauma that leads to the addiction, we're not addressing the
Right.
actual illness. We're talking about a symptom of the illness. And so something that I'm hopeful that we can continue to improve on from the department's perspective is doing some more of that trauma-informed care. You know, back in the day for substance abuse treatment, it was a lot of you're an idiot and why don't you stop what you're doing? A lot of shame and guilt. And what we've learned is that obviously doesn't work. Right. No one is more ashamed than someone who fails when they're trying to get sober. And so when we're looking at that trauma-informed care, we're looking at having that safe environment where you feel safe to discuss your trauma issues so that then you have the ability to process through it so that it doesn't hold that shame or that guilt, and you're not hiding in your trauma, so that you can start looking for different ways to address it. Because substance abuse itself serves a purpose. I mean, if it didn't, people wouldn't do it. Right. But it serves the purpose of making people feel a certain way, so that they can survive. Yeah. And so, but eventually it becomes the killer instead of the savior. Yeah. And so if we can get that increase in safety of discussing trauma, and then, in continuing to improve resiliency training, I think those are going to be key for us moving forward to really reduce substance use and recidivation. But also, I think something that we're not doing as a department, I guess I'm talking a lot about what we're not doing versus what we're doing, because we are doing some great things. But if we could help people learn how to place interventions for those ACEs so that they're not recreating those ACEs with their families, that I think that's a key. Because when you first started, you said about what are we doing about substance abuse? We've got to start with people when they're interacting with people when they're young.
Once we do our treatment here and we move on to parole it's still part of the IDOC system, but it's a different branch of it basically. What goes on from there? How does treatment continue from there?
Well, it's a little different for each person, so it depends on your levels of risk. But some people, so the department has 25 DARs on staff throughout the state,
which is
that are drug and alcohol rehabilitation specialists. Okay. And so there are some classwork, there's some classes that are done at the district, like an advanced practice group. But for some people, that's really not enough when it comes to addressing substance abuse issues. And so a significant number of people attend treatment in the community. And with the passing of the advanced Medicaid a couple of years ago in Idaho, it really opened the door for substance abuse treatment, because previously people struggled to pay for treatment, and now it's covered.
Oh, that's great.
That's a big difference. Yeah.
And I had mentioned some statistics earlier, but I wasn't looking at the statistics. So we, in our moderate high risk residents, Medicaid had paid for $13.9 million of substance use and mental health treatment for individuals on probation and parole. And then it was an additional And those are, some people don't get Medicaid, so they don't meet the criteria. And so SUD funding paid for another $3 million worth of, $2.5 million for substance use disorders. And then when we look at who didn't have treatment, it's hard to tell, because if people have private insurance, then it's not tracked through the system. And some people have done treatment previously, so they weren't needing treatment. So it just kind of depends. We do have MAT services now available, which that's new in Idaho, because Idaho has never really been a harm reduction state. But they've finally decided that Medicaid-assisted treatment is a good idea. So right now, if people get out, and especially if they have opiate addictions, they can sign up for MAT services.
Wow.
And so they can receive Suboxone, and it's small doses of medication so that they don't overdose and die, and it reduces the craving for opiate use. And with opiate use, you don't get the euphoric feeling. And so it reduces people's desire to want to continue using. And I really was grateful that Idaho finally, added something like that into their treatment modality, because other states have looked at that previously and have seen some real benefits. So it's exciting.
So it's interesting to me when you talk about this or the statistics, it's substance use, not necessarily substance abuse. So what's the difference there, or is there a difference? What are they looking at when they say that?
Well, we can put all kinds of different titles on things, but when we say addiction, I mean, there's a true addiction. That desire to stop is significant. And we can talk about physical addiction. So especially with opiates, our body becomes physically addicted. And so then there's a significant withdrawal to come through that. With like meth, it's not so much a physical addiction as a psychological addiction. Alcohol is a physical addiction. And so a lot of times when someone who's a heavy drinker stops drinking, they'll have a heart attack or a stroke. I mean, that's pretty common because of that physical addiction. It causes some significant changes in the body. And then there's substance use that may be the person that uses, but there's not an addiction so much. And then there's abuse, substance abuse. And so I like to think of that as the person that, instead of taking 2 Tylenol like the bottle says, they take 5 because it works better for them. Or they get pain medications from their physician, and it says take 1 every 8 hours, but they start taking 1 every 6 because 1 every 8 isn't cutting it. And then pretty soon they're doing 1 every 4, and pretty soon that's not enough. And so then they're, running out of their medication, and then they're going out into the community to purchase pills because they don't have enough. And a lot of the times those people are addicted, but they don't want to acknowledge the addiction because it's legal. And so you'll hear a lot of times people who have legal narcotics really condemning those that are using non-legal narcotics and kind of trying to justify the same behavior by saying mine is a prescription and so I'm okay and I'm not out in the street, selling myself for drugs.
Except a lot of times that actually turns into purchasing those illegal ones because you can't get the legal ones anymore and you're addicted, right? Is that
right? Or doing other criminogenic behaviors like seeing different physicians, trying to go to different pharmacies, trying to fill prescriptions not under insurance, going under a friend's name to a physician. And so then it becomes like some
Criminal mindedness.
Yep, absolutely. Yep, criminal mindedness. But it's that those oftentimes end up with charges of like identification fraud or insurance fraud, those types of things.
So if you had like a magic wand and you were able to, boom, make a wish and be able to solve this problem with not within the community in the whole at large, but within the IDOC, what would you do? What would be the one thing the one change you would make?
I always love the magic pillar, magic wand question. Go back and erase your trauma would be the thing that would be my magic wand.
Oh.
Because that is really where it starts. You know, when you have that trauma as a kid, we can't erase it. You know, but
Right.
if that was my magic, that's what I would do. Is I would erase the trauma. But because we can't do that, then the thing that I would love to do is continue to increase our staff's awareness about trauma-informed care, and not just our treatment staff, but general frontline staff, because that's who you spend most of your time with. The CO on your unit is the person that you talk to the most.
Right.
And if they can share compassion for you and treat you humanely as a human being, and you know that you're cared for and you're not just a number, then that, I think, is the best step we can do to start repairing some of that trauma.
So I want to thank our guests, Larry and Wendy, for being here with us today and talking about addiction and recovery and substance abuse. We appreciate your time and spending it with us. Thank you.
Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you, guys. Appreciate it.
She's controlling the podcast again.